So let's trim these back just like we did that first take. And we've got all these 3 takes kind of cleaned up a little bit. And let's stay on this last one that we just did, and I'll listen to it one more time in the mix. I've got the click muted, I've got the cue muted, and let's just listen. So it sounds cool. We've got this preset fuzzy twang. Now let's look at adding additional processing using inserts. And we're going to look at a couple of the most common ones. The first thing I want to look at is EQ. So we're going to adjust further the bass, the treble, and adjust kind of the EQ of the sound. On the amp, we do have bass and treble, more like a guitar amp, but this is using one of the other inserts. And I want to show you a couple. The first one is a Pultec tube EQ. This is a Pultec EQ P1A. This is a very legendary outboard analog EQ that utilizes tubes and is really expensive as an outboard piece of equipment. But we have the emulation plugin right here. And real quick of the knobs and the controls, we have boost, and then we have a knob that says attend, which means attenuation or cut. So we can boost or cut or remove or lower the low end and the high end. Very simple interface. And all that I want to do is I want to select my low frequency. Let's select 100 Hertz. And I'm going to remove a little bit of that. I want to remove a little bit more of the low end. And then we can select a high frequency. So I'm going to select 5K or maybe 4K. And then boost a little bit of that. So let's listen, and I can remove a little 100 Hertz and add a little 4K in the top end, some of the higher treble frequencies. So that gives it a little thinner, a little brighter character. So we can listen to that in the mix, and then I'll turn off and on the EQ so we can hear the difference. So it just adds a little bit more presence in the mix. So that sounds really good. So that's one EQ that I wanted to point out. I'll show you one other one. This is an API 560. And this is cool because this is a graphic EQ. This is a 10-band graphic EQ. And this one, everybody's used to this. This is usually in a horizontal way where we can boost the sliders of the bass or the treble, lowering or reducing the bass or the treble. This is the same thing, it's just vertically. So this is showing you the frequencies. 31 is very low, and all the way up is 16K, very, very high. So this is bass to treble. And we've got 1K kind of in the middle with the red slider, all right? And notice each one of these, 31, 63, 125, each one is doubling pretty much as we go up, and that's every octave. So you actually get the ability to boost and cut at nearly every octave, starting from 33 Hertz all the way up to 16K. And we can boost or cut using the slider. So same thing that I'm going to do that I did before. I'm going to remove some of the low end. So I'll remove the 63, the 125, the 31, the 63, and the 125. And then I'm going to boost a little bit of that 4K around that range. And now we can listen to this one. So again, different shaping, different emulation, emulating a different outboard analog EQ, but very easy to come in and adjust that bass and that treble and that high and that low end. So leave the API there. Now let's talk very briefly about compression. Now compression is a very wide topic and you get a lot of debate, and compression can be something tricky and just takes time to practice with. But I want to just touch on it here. And compression basically helps to redefine the dynamics or the loudness of a sound so that it kind of lifts it out in the mix a little bit. It's different if you want something to be more present, like this guitar, we want it to be a little more punchy, a little more present. Rather than just turn up the volume with the fader, that's simply going to raise everything. A compressor helps to compress and redefine the dynamics, giving it a little bit different presence. So I can hit the next plus box on my inserts, and I'm going to put in LA2A. And I'm going to pull up the LA2A Legacy, and this is the very famous Teletronics LA2A emulation, emulating the outboard version, which of course, as we talked about in our history, Bill Putnam invented way back in the 60s, and phenomenal unit, and we have it available to us as an emulation. So knobs are very simple, gain and peak reduction, but rather than get into the nuts and bolts of that, let's look at the presets. This is a fantastic way to get started, and we've got some presets: medium compression, major compression, gentle compression, and then finger-picked acoustic, and then something for drum overheads. So let's do medium compression, and you can see it snaps the dials to where that setting would be. And let's audition this in the mix, listening to what the compressor does to help it sound a little bit more present. So you can see the VU meter going, that's the compression. And compression can often be very subtle. In this case, what it brought out was a lot of that pick noise. And that's a good example of what compression is doing, because the pick noises are a little bit of those lower sounds. And by using a compressor and redefining the dynamic range, we're controlling the peaks, which are the loudest part, and we're also kind of lifting up the lower dynamics, redefining the overall dynamics, and that's what made those pick noises come out a little bit more. So just to touch on that, that's quickly how we can get a preset going with this. Let's look at one other compressor that we talked about in one of the earlier videos, and that's the 1176. So another legendary compressor, a little different character, a little different style, but no different here. We can use it to redefine some of the dynamics to make the guitar sound a little bit more present or a little more punchy in the mix. So same thing, let's go to presets and see what might be cool here. We have guitar solo tamer, that sounds great. And let's listen to this one in the mix, and I'll turn it off and on so we can hear the difference. So similar thing with the pickup noises, similar, just a slightly different style, slightly different character to it. But very quickly, this is how we incorporate some of these plugins. First, using the Marshall Plexi Classic for our amp tone and our guitar tone, but then EQ and compression to give the sound a little more shape, a little more of the tone and character that we want, and then using that to get it really where we're wanting sitting in the mix. The next thing I want to show you might be a little bit advanced, but I think it's important to point out. I'm going to unmute the click, and I'm actually going to solo the click. And when we play this, I'm also going to turn on the metronome. Now we have a click track, so we don't necessarily need it, but I'm going to turn on the metronome, and let's listen to something. Now you can hear those are slightly off, all right? Now, good news is we have the proper tempo because we knew the tempo of our song at 112. So the tempo is correct, but it's slightly off from the click. And when that becomes important is, if you notice, if I come down with my mouse cursor and I select, notice these little lines right here. That's called the grid. So the timeline inside Luna and inside most DAWs has a timeline. And the timeline is very important because up top we have bars and beats. And so this allows us to have our song on a timeline and on a grid that is correct with our tempo. But in this case, it's not correct. And if we listen to the drums, the downbeat is a little bit off. There's the downbeat, and it's a little bit off of our grid. I can zoom in by hitting command brackets. So here's our downbeat, and here's bar 3, beat 2. So it's not on the grid. I want to get it on the grid. So to do this, what we're going to do is solo the drums again, and I'm going to zoom in, and there's a mode up here where we can snap on the grid. So if I turn that on, notice when I put the cursor right here, it snaps to the closest nearest grid, which is bar 3, beat 2. And if I go anywhere, the next closest bar is bar 3. So now it's only allowing me to snap. And I have the ability to change what the grid is on. So I can do beats on the grid. I can do half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, or bar. All right. So we can turn grid off, and I'm going to select the downbeat and find the downbeat of these drums. So here's the downbeat. I'm going to zoom in and get right on the start of that downbeat. And then I'm going to hit Command E. And I'm going to select everything to the left of it and cut it. So what we just did was we made a cut, and I deleted everything to the left. That gives us the exact downbeat right there. Now we can come up, and when we put the mouse in the lower half of the click stem, I can select it. Then I'm going to hold down Shift and select all of my stems and the guitars that I recorded and the little mix stem. Then I'm going to line up the downbeat of those drums on the next bar, which is bar 4, so I can keep zooming in and get that right at bar 4. And one of the great things about recording in a digital system is I can put my mouse in the bottom left, and just like we trimmed the audio, I can bring back the audio of the drums, giving us that count in, and that shows you the power of non-destructive editing. So I can make these cuts, even the guitars, we can come back and bring this back so it's non-destructive. Very cool. So now we have the drums starting on the downbeat, which is now 4, but it's on the grid. So I've got my click on, and we'll listen to this. And now the click stem and the metronome are lined up, and my grid is now accurate. So this is important, especially when you want to come in and start looping things. So say you want to get a part, you want to practice a part, that's where looping comes in. So we can turn on the snapping of the grid, and I've got it set to each bar. So we can come in, and I can select 2 bars, turn on loop, and I can loop this and practice that section. So that is really where we start to get the power of looping, and we got to make sure everything is on the grid. So now that we've seen several different options of recording, now let's have a little bit more fun. What I want to do is add a couple more tracks. So we can come up, get out of the plugin window, and then add another track. We're just going to add an audio track, and we'll call this Rhythm Guitar 1. So we added that track. We need to change the input. So we just go back to where we were. We know we're on input 1, all right? So we've got a new track. We're hearing the input there. This time I'm going to turn back on my overdrive, and I'm going to get like a rhythm tone, and I'm going to turn the drive way down, like we talked about, just to give it clean, but with a little bit of character. I'm going to turn on the modulation machine. Can change it to flanger. And I'm also going to add some delay and reverb. So we can hear the delay happening. I want to get the delay correct on our tempo. You can see the light flashing there, and I want to make sure that the tempo is right. So I'm going to play my click track and tap along with the tempo. So I got that going along now to our tempo. And we've got the note right here, and we've got a long delay. So I'm going to pull the delay down And I'm actually going to change this to triplet notes. And let's just get a different type of delay happening. Turn the mix down a little bit. That sounds pretty cool. Turn our reverb up a little bit. All right, so that gives us a cool little rhythm tone. And now I'm just going to add a simple rhythm. I've muted my lead parts for this, and I'm just going to now just add some little rhythm chords, have a little fun. So there's a little rhythm there, a little rhythm part that we just recorded using that tone. So we'll turn input and record off, turn the click off. So I'm going to hit Control click and duplicate without content, create another one, and I'm going to record the exact same part, duplicating what I just recorded. Now I've got these two recorded rhythm tracks. And this is where it gets fun because I can come over to the mixer. I've got these two playing, and we'll play them together. So that's both of them, and I can pull the first one I did over to the left using the pan pot, putting it at about 9 o'clock, and we'll put the second one I recorded off to the right at about 3 o'clock, and that gives it a really cool stacked guitar texture. So now we've got both of those, and notice that if I pull one of the faders down, they're not, we want these to be together. So I can hold down Option and click these, select both of these tracks, and then close out our input, and I can add this to what's called a group. And I can call this rhythm group, hit OK, and now these faders are linked. So very easy. We can come over here and add these to their own group, and that just links the faders. So now we can get it blended in the mix. So now we've got everything, and we can start playing around with our mix. So we can put the mouse up here, make the faders a little bit bigger. And now let's come and let's trim these rhythm guitars. Now we're still on the grid, so it's snapping to the grid. I can zoom in and trim these back. And if I put the mouse in the upper left-hand corner, you now see that little line icon, and that's just adding a fade in. We can do this on the leads too. Add a little fade in to clean those up. And that makes the entrance of those just a little bit cleaner. Same thing with the lead. So now let's get everything in the mix blended where we want. I don't need the cue, I don't need the click. I got the metronome off. All we have is the downbeat with the little drum fill, and we'll get the mix. So now we can go back, we can add inserts, more effects to other tracks like the piano, like the bass, and we can really get everything blended the way we want. Once we get the mix exactly where we want, now we want to be able to create a mix down and a song and a file that we can share and play with anybody. So we're going to zoom out a little bit, and at the top, the loop area, okay, has this little bar, and this is, we can select kind of our whole song, all right? And then it's as easy as coming up to File, Export, Mix Down, and then we have our mix down settings. So the source is the main output. That's what we want. You can bypass effects, do certain things there, and it's showing where you can save to. Now this is very important. Remember when we first set this up, it's saving to the Luna folder on our hard drive in this project in a folder called Exported Files. And then the audio file settings, we want to select wave, sample rate. You can have some choices here. My recommendation would be 44.1, and then the bit depth of 24 bits. So 24-bit, 44.1. We can also change this to an MP3. The difference being is that a wave is full bandwidth, full quality. It's a bigger file, so that's going to result in a much bigger file. So if you're emailing this or uploading it to Dropbox or something, maybe you want to select an MP3, and we can come back and do a wave or another version. So we can leave the encoding at VBR, quality highest. You can choose that there. So I'll just do an MP3 and click mix down, and it's going to go ahead and mix down our project into a stereo MP3. Over in our project folder is the exported file, and we can come in here and we can rename this if we want. We can call it Good Luck Guitars Mix 1. And then we can create a playlist, your own recordings, for example, in iTunes, and now that's available to share, to listen to, take with you, and enjoy your own recording. So now we can share this, we can send it, whether you want to upload it online, share it with your friends and family, share it with bandmates. We now have this that we can play.